Mr. Amaldev, would you like to give some idea as to the origin of liturgical music traditions and how it came about?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Hardly anybody asks me this question. For instance, when we think of liturgical music in India today, most people simply think, it should be a nice song, people should like some song and we should start singing it in the church.
That's right.
Obviously that's not right. Liturgical music is a highly specialized kind of music. You should think about the origin of it as you asked me to. Namely, our liturgical music has its origin in the liturgy of the Jews.
Right.
And Jesus Christ, being a Pakka Jew, even at the moment of death, he was not making a personal prayer. He was actually quoting the psalm, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Oh God, why have you forsaken me? He didn't use his own words. He was quoting the scriptures, which is a liturgical prayer. That being the case, the early Christians, the first Christians, the apostles, being Pakka Jews, they followed their Jewish traditions. And obviously the first Christian hymns would have been naturally Jewish hymns. And we have some remnants of them still in our liturgy. For example, Hosanna to the Son of David. It is definitely from the old this thing. And also I should imagine Hagios Otheos is one of the early Christian prayers, has its roots in the Jewish liturgy. Once again, therefore, after the Pentecost, when the apostles went out of Jerusalem, the first stop was the big city called Antioch. Antioch was much more important than Jerusalem because it was a hub of civilizations. And there, in the initial stages of the church, the entire ceremonies were conducted not in Hebrew, not in Latin, not in Syriac, but in Greek. This fact we are forgetting. All this fight between the rites today is ridiculous, because if you know the historic perspective, the fight is useless, because we all were Greeks in the beginning. If you want to talk about the Greek rite. Anyway, the music obviously was Jewish, and eventually some Greek influence mixed with it. And then as the church moved from place to place, the local music also added color to them. Ultimately, when the church got established in Rome, the Roman, the European tradition blended with Hellenistic musical things got blended, and we got the Gregorian chant coming out of Europe after a little while. So, when we think of all these things, is it okay for us to start singing a song like from the latest Hindi film or the latest Malayalam film? So that, I think, is the answer.
Now, how would you like to put this in in India's perspective? How it has evolved India broadly?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question again. Now, the early Christians that came to India certainly were from the Syrian background. But even then, when we say as early as 52 there was Christianity in India, we must realize the liturgy must have been Greek, not Syriac as yet. The Syriac elements would have come later, say around 300, 400. When we talk about Kanai Thomanan party coming into Kerala, they may have had some Syriac liturgy. But even now, as in our own liturgy, the Latin liturgy and the Syro-Malabar liturgy, or even the Jacobite liturgy, or let's say the Malankara liturgy, we still have the remnants of the old Greek thing, the Kyrie eleison they say, we say Kyrie eleison, or the Hagios Otheos, we are singing in the during the Good Friday celebrations. But of course the early non-Latin Christians sing it every day. Devame ni parishuddhana. Very ancient melody, no talam, no beat, nothing, but evocative of the ancient style of singing. And we have its counterpart from the Gregorian chant, which was originally Greek music, like Hagios Otheos, and immediately the translation is given, Sanctus Deus and the great. Hagios athanatos eleisoimos, which means Holy God, Deathless One, have mercy on us, and so on and so forth. So the traditions are identical. We are only fighting about what? The language, whether you bow to the east or you bow to the west or whatever, all that. So the traditions grew, and the early Christians who came after the 400 had the Syriac Chaldean tradition, which was kept untouched in India for more than 600 years, 1600 years, because the Christianity remained a caste. They never proselytized, if you recall. All this talk about, in my opinion, talk about some Brahmins becoming Christians and all is bogus, because there were no Brahmins at the time in South India. At that time, the entire South India was, or Kerala definitely was, Buddhist. So, if India, the Christians had started proselytizing as early as 52 AD, the entire India would have been Christian by now. Because by the same token, Europe had become entirely Christian, 2000 years. But what we find is that 1% of the population remains Christian. And you can see the Christianity fundamentally remained a foreign religion, even though we adapted a few details of Thaligattu, Udupum, Bhakshanokya, we adapted all that. However, in the church, everything was non-Indian. So that explains why we remain 1% of the population.
What would be, how would you be able to expand a little bit on the change from this stationary situation remaining true to for 1500 years or so to the present day situation?
So this tradition came all along until the European missionaries landed here around 1500, along with Vasco da Gama and all that. They came in, and apparently the Christians, local Christians, were very happy to meet some other Christians. So initially there was a great euphoria, and in fact all the church paraphernalia, such as the clothing, the architecture, the bell, all the paraphernalia of the Western church was happily accepted by the local churches here. But only when the Portuguese started putting pressure on removing some venerable names from the canon of the Mass of the existing Christians here, whom these venerable names belong to certain people whom the local Christians considered saints and the Western church considered heretics, the problem started. Then in the same vein, I think the Western, the Portuguese and Spanish and Italian fathers who came in made a big mistake in throwing away many traditions of the local Christians, saying it is all bad. There may have been a few bad things, but they jumped at conclusions and threw many things out, and which naturally angered the local Christianity, and then some of them went away from that union and some of them remained with the union. Now this continued. A major Latinization took place in liturgy for those who agreed to join Rome. At first that was accepted very happily. So for example, the CMI Fathers' roots originally is the third order of the Carmelites, of the discalced Carmelites. I mean the non-footwear wearing Carmelites. Discalced meaning not wearing shoes. Imagining Europe not to wear shoes in the winter, you can imagine. Anyway, the CMI Fathers were originated as the third order of the Carmelites discalced. But of course, right nowadays that thing cannot be found out because the name has been changed and the Sultan and everything also has been changed. People do not recognize the roots. Anyway, so, but that angle of Latinization, rightly so, has been stopped, and the Syro-Malabar, for example, wants to recapture their ancient traditions and rites. which is fine. We should not fight with them on that score. In fact, Roman Catholic Church is not all Latin. There's a big mistake we make. In the church there are 10 different rites. The Roman Catholic Church means Coptic rite.
Right. Of Egypt?
Of Egypt. Then there is so many, for example, in Spain there is another rite of I forgot the name. Then there is one rite in France, which is the Gallican rite, Mozarabic rite. Then there in Italy itself there is that Ambrosian rite.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? Under the nose of Rome there are so many other rites which is not Roman rite.
Right.
So this fight about Roman, Latin and Syro-Malabar and this and all is just lack of knowledge about the true nature of the church. Come what may. With regard to music, we should realize that the music was not well preserved. Over all these years, the Syriac music or the Jacobite music and all that undergone so many terrible changes, and now they sound really bad from the musical point of view.
Yeah.
But the emotion and the ethos associated with such music is undeniably beautiful. The Latinization Latinization of the music also took place to some extent. The real opening of the window came only with Vatican II. Vatican II said there is no point in reproducing France or Italy or Portugal in India. India being such an advanced civilization, it is foolish on our part to import the things from Europe. There's some great music here, sacred music here. There are great rituals here. Why shouldn't India adapt to those just as Europe did once upon a time?
Right.
Or just as the Greek civilization did, just as the Syriac civilization did? Why shouldn't India do the same? Under that, guys, we got some guidance from Vatican II, but I am afraid we were not prepared to take it in the best of spirits. Or those who took in the best of spirits, the first generation may have been okay. The next generation lost their perspectives. And for example, let us put it bluntly, in early stages when in 1962 or 65, when Vatican Council permitted us to sing vernacular songs in the church, for lack of knowledge, most composers thought the best music will be what they thought very sweet and good, the film songs or the dramas or songs from the stage shows. Even I was a victim of it until I learned better. However, the trend of using secularistic or secular style music in the church took deeper root than a handful of individuals who tried to go the correct historical and the right liturgical way. For example, the need to adapt Indian classical music for our liturgical purpose, or the bhajan style for our liturgical. So many things are there in India. Even folk music can be used. Just actually, the Jewish liturgical music is folk music of Sia. They don't have any classical music. For example, Hava Nagila, Hava Nagila, Hava. There, Hava Nagila is a famous folk song. Many songs of the Jewish liturgy is of that kind. So there is no harm in adapting folk music from our background. So let me conclude there. This trend, the corrected trend, was attempted at first in the right spirit, but we have lost track of it now for lack of control, for lack of guidance, and for lack of intelligence and knowledge and historic perspective. We are now completely, shall I say, at sea. We are singing unbelievably bad sounding songs during these sacred mysteries.
Mr. Amaldev, now I'd like to lead you to the situation in Hindi belt,
Yes.
in terms of the music and the liturgy and how you view it.
Yes. Without exaggeration, let me say, the concept of adaptation, that is taking something from the soil of the place and using it for the worship of the Christians, was not something invented by a few recently. In fact, as early as 1600 and a little later, when people like Besky, John Brito and De Nobili, these Jesuits came to India.
Right.
Rome had already issued an official document saying, please do not import Portugal, Spain, France and all that to India. Please adapt things as befits the situation. And people like Brito, De Nobili, all those Jesuits, Besky had, for example, Besky used to travel with turban on his head and on the elephant and go from temple to temple with, arguing and convincing some Brahmins to join the Christian fold and things like that. John de Brito wore kavi and went around. What is the saffron color? So, things like that. They did that as early as 1640 and later in 1700 and all that. However, I am saying all this after reading some books, but in my own life I came across this when I went to the north of India, when I was studying as an SVD, Society of the Divine Word, member of the Society of the Divine Word. I came across a great man called Father Engelbert Zeitler. He had come from Germany after his priesthood as early as 1956-57. We were, the aspirants. And we became his proteges when we started studying philosophy. And it was at that time he told us that if Saint Jerome had made a small mistake, for example, when he literally translated the Psalms and he made what was poetry into prose. Because his perspective was that the biblical truth should not suffer. So he went on a literary adaptation. He said, Psalms are songs, Jewish poetry. So when you translate that or when you bring it into our culture, you should treat it as song, as literature. And the music also should follow suit. When I inquired in the society, who are the spearhead in this? As early as 1932, a batch of Germans had come. Mm-hmm. One among them was Father George Proksch, a Prussian from the north of Germany, was a musician. He had advocated this as early as 1932. And I'm sure the German brain, for example, Father Neuner, who was one of the Periti at Second Vatican Council, was in Pune, and he was an old priest already, and so these German thoughts must have exchanged hands, and these thoughts must have been expressed at the Vatican Council, and then we have been given directives in the perspective. So Father Proksch and those fathers, and then there was a certain Father Edmund O.F.M. Cap, a Canadian Franciscan, and his chelas. And there were several other men, say in Patna, there was a lot of Jesuits working on this. And they also went into the tribal music of 24 Parganas and adapted them. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And initially the first generation who were enthusiastic and, shall I say, looking for the right thing, they came up with a few gems. But the second generation already went the wrong way. They went into, what they considered to be popularistic music and blending it with unwanted guitars and harmony and things like that.
What would you propose to do in this current situation? Where do you think the best value could come from an effort of someone like you?
We must have our perspectives clear. Namely, as I am from the Latin background, Latin Rite background, I would put my one foot on Gregorian chant. And because Gregorian chant with the traditional 2000 years has already covered all these problems beautifully. For example, Gregorian chant most of the time uses only a gamut of 6 or 7 notes, which means this is a range which ordinary people can sing. But nowadays when we hear some songs in the church, they are going to gamut of 13, 14. Only ustads can sing like that, like sa pa sa re ga pa da sa re ga pa. Who can sing that? Our poor grandmother, if she's struggling to sing something in the chapel, so we are composing and giving impossible songs. So I will put one foot strongly on the Gregorian chant. Maybe another half of a foot if I am working on, let's say, for the Syro-Malabar or for the Jacobites or for the Orthodox or Syro-Malankara, I will study their music and how best to adapt them into the Indian ethos. And another point, adapting ragas for our use, we have to be very careful. See, we have to water down the raga a little bit. You cannot bring all the nuances of the heavy classical raga. Suppose you call Chambai Vaidyanath Bhagavath, he will sing one raga in its pure form. That pure form ordinary people can't sing. We have to simplify. Let's take the scale. Maybe a few rules of Vadi, Samvadi, a few recognizable features and things like that. And the talam should be super simple, lyrics should be crystal clear, things like that. So I would work in this fashion, adapting Indian music, let it be South Indian classical, North Indian classical, let it be folk music or let it be anything. We must make a beautiful amalgam of what was Christian music from in the past with what was good religious music and non-religious music in India, and make a very studious, or shall I say judicious blend of all this. We cannot simply say, we cannot simply jump into it. There will be a lot of thinking, lot of experimentation, both in melody as well as in lyrics.
Thank you so much.